All right, I'm going to kick off today and I'm going to share with you what's going on in Ukraine, because there's been quite a few developments overnight and there's a bit of stuff that's been happening. So to begin with, the top story really from today is NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg has announced that over 98% of the promised combat vehicles have been delivered to Ukraine by NATO allies and the partner countries as well. And this has significantly bolstered Kyiv's military capabilities as it considers launching a counteroffensive against Russian forces. The support includes more than 1,550 armored vehicles, 230 tanks, vast amounts of ammunition and training and equipment of over 9 new Ukrainian brigades, totaling more than 30,000 troops. Notably, NATO partner countries such as Sweden and Australia, can you believe it, have also provided armored vehicles. Stoltenberg, speaking from Brussels, stated that this support will put Ukraine in a strong position to continue retaking occupied territory, thus strengthening its negotiating position in potential. So is he flagging that, hey, this is not going to end on the battlefield, it's going to end in negotiation? Well, I think we all know that wars always end in negotiation, but he's flagging it there for the first time. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has had his first contact with Chinese leader Xi Jinping since Russia's full-scale invasion yesterday. We reported that on yesterday as well. Despite the positive reception there from Ukraine and Western officials, the conversation hasn't really resulted in any immediate shift in peace or prospects of peace or anything like that. The Chinese said that they're going to send an envoy to Ukraine, which is a good thing. And if they can be the mediators in between the Russians and the Ukrainians, that can only be helpful, because this has to stop. So China is seeking to establish itself as a global diplomatic power, and it's refused to criticize Moscow's invasion, which I think is strange as well. And it's maintained that Russia has a diplomatic ally in opposition to US influence in global affairs, which I find a little bit amusing. It's kind of like the Chinese see what the Americans are doing and they're trying to do the opposite, just to deliberately piss them off. In other news in the conflict, Ukraine continues to take a heavy toll on civilians. Between Wednesday and Thursday, at least 7 civilians were killed and 33 were injured. So it's a pretty awful state of affairs, folks. It's pretty horrible what's going on, and it continues to actually happen, which is, in my mind, it just seems really, really strange. It seems strange that this is going on in this day and age, and what's happening with it. I don't get it. So I just wanted to dive into a quick screen share here with you folks as I get tongue-tied at 5 o'clock in the morning. I want to share with you some of the developments that have been happening over in the eastern part of the map here. And for those of you who are listening, I'm just showing the deep state map and giving you folks an update on what's going on. So we can see that there's not much more happening in Bakhmut. We're just going to be careful with my mouse here as I scroll in. It just goes a bit nuts. It looks like the Kromatov intersection has still not been taken by the Russians. The grey part denotes the fighting here, but it looks like the Wagner Group and the Russians have nearly taken the whole city, and we're still resisting there. There's no chance that they're going to be encircled. They've been trying to do that now for months, and it hasn't happened. They haven't been able to push past the defensive lines in the south or the north there. So Bakhmut seems to be at a bit of a stalemate, and we seem to be bleeding those Wagnerites and those Russians dry in that part of the world. If I come on down to the bottom part of the map, into the southern part down here, we can see that over near Kherson, we've had some progress, and some of the ground has been taken on the southern side of the Dnipro River, which is pretty interesting, particularly in and around Kherson here, because all the bridges that were over there were completely destroyed and dropped by the Russians. So over here at Antonivka here, that bridge was dropped, and that has been shelled in the last couple of days. So it looks like the Ukrainians are seeming to establish a beachhead here. But if I scroll out of the deep state map and show you another map, what you'll see is that this part of the world is just swamps. There's like literally nothing you can do. If you can establish the beachhead here and get to Olenshki here, this place here, if you can get to there and establish that as your front line there, then that might give you the opportunity to bring your logistics in and your supply lines there as well. But the Russians have dug in pretty heavily, particularly up over here near Zaporizhia, because the Ukrainians don't really have the capability to pull in via the river here, because it's such a big divide, and they're able to resupply themselves from Kherson here. So the most likely part of the counterattack, and I mentioned this the other day, is back through Zaporizhia, where they're coming down this road here to Melitopol, and they'll divide the Russians here in half. When they divide them in half, they'll take out the Kerch Bridge again, because we've got the ability to do that now with long-range standoff, JDAM. If they can get from here, they'll be able to take the ground and cut them off. And if they can cut the Russians off here and cut them in half, they end up on a couple of different fronts. And particularly if they take down the bridge again, which is a pretty interesting proposition. So there's a whole series of photos that have come out in the last couple of days about a series of underwater drones that have been created. I'm not quite, I don't have the dexterity to pull it out, but these things look like torpedoes. And what they called them was underwater torpedoes, and they have pretty extended ranges. The thing is under the water, and it's got like a GPS antenna that comes out of the top of it. It's a little bit like what you see when you see a surveyor walking around and someone's pegging out a property or something like that. The surveyor's got his pole, and on top of it, it's got an RTK antenna that goes there. And these submarines sit below the waterline. They travel at low speed. They're made of plastic, so you can't really see them. They're silent as well because they've got electric motors, and you can see the way that the motors are actually moving. And they have these big long extended ranges of a couple of 100 miles. So part of the problem that the Russians have had down in Sevastopol in Crimea is their ships are harbored in that part of the world, on the northern part of the harbor, and they've put all submarine nets in there, and they've mined it all in there as well. And what we're seeing here is the Ukrainians adapt to that old school thinking, that old school mentality. Those old school Russian admirals go, that's not a problem. This is how we solve those problems. And the Ukrainians are just using asymmetric warfare. So there's 20-year-old kids on the front line building drones and building explosives. And I can't think of anything more that would be more fun than that. Imagine having the gazillions of dollars from NATO, all the explosives in the world, and thinking about how to use asymmetric warfare against Russians. I saw just before this, as well as an additional update to what's going on in the front, that the Ukrainians tried to take out Putin with a drone. Yeah, and that drone was, I don't think it was shot down. We were talking about this yesterday as well. It doesn't appear to have been shot down. It looks like it clipped a tree and crashed, because it crashed like upside down, and it didn't explode or anything like that, and it wasn't damaged. It was just in pieces, like someone crashed their own remote control plane. So the sensors on that thing and the obstacle avoidance on that thing is obviously not as good as the Chinese DJI technology, but what they got to do is pull some of those sensors off and put it on these things and implement that. It can't be hard to code those sorts of things because it's all open source, and you can do that relatively easily. But yeah, I don't know. I read the story and I thought, I felt myself being drawn into it. I'm drawn into this story. I'm like gravitating to it, and I went, stop it. And I pulled myself out because it's propaganda. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's propaganda. The Ukrainians saying, we flew the drone, it went within 30 kilometers of Moscow, and blah, blah, blah. And it was full of explosives. And here's the and there's the footage that was all real. And we were trying to assassinate Putin. You don't know where he is. Come on, man. Like, where's the Prime Minister of Australia right now? I don't know. Where's the President of the United States right now? I don't know. Where's Putin? I don't know. He's not running around with a mobile phone in his pocket, the NSA saying, here he is in St. Petersburg in this building here on that level, like some Jason Bourne movie, and I'm looking through the windows with a thermal camera or thermal binoculars about to call in an airstrike. What a load of rubbish. Just propaganda. And, it is what it is. But hopefully on May Day coming up, in those May Day parades, we're going to see some real asymmetric warfare with maybe for the first time, we'll see some swarming drone attacks happening in Moscow. So what we're seeing in the lead up to that is potentially a pretense for it as well. There's a video going around as well. I'll try and dig that video out as you're talking. I'll show it to you because it's pretty interesting. There's a Ukrainian guy. He's sitting on the roof of a 4-wheel drive, and the camera angle is like from the bottom of in front, it's probably about 2 or 3 meters in front of the car, looking up at him. And he's standing there or sitting on the car, and he goes like this. He points like this, like an old cavalry guy, charge, like that. And as he goes charge like that, there's about 200 drones that fly over the top of him. And they're not like off-the-shelf DJI Chinese drones. They're all FPV drones. So someone's wearing a pair of goggles controlling that thing, and they're flying over. And that is the future of warfare. So the Chinese are known to have mastered that technology, and the Ukrainians have adapted to that technology in the last couple of months. And I think we're going to see that being a large part of the counteroffensive. And how do you counter all of the dug-in Russian troops just south of Zaporizhia?